Good evening all. On behalf of Council, I recognise the traditional custodians of the land and pay tributes to elders past, present and emerging. As councillors of Ku-ring-gai Council, we should always be aware that the decisions that we make affect the daily lives of those we represent. Let us make all these decisions with knowledge, goodwill and respecting the views of others. Before we start tonight's meeting, I would like to outline a few points regarding this evening's proceedings. Currently, we have a few technical issues with the live stream, and it is being live streamed at the Council website at www.kmc.nsw.gov.au/live stream. Only councillors and council staff will be shown on camera. The webcast of the meeting is available on Council's website. The webcast will commence once the Mayor is seated and will cease if Council goes into confidential, where the public and the press are excluded, pursuant to Section 10A of the Local Government Act. Council meetings will remain open to the public as observers, but in line with the Code of Meeting Practice, speakers will now address the Council through the monthly public forum and not at Council meetings. For more information about addressing Council, please visit our website www.krg.nsw.gov.au. All present tonight must refrain from engaging in disorderly conduct, publicly alleging breaches of the Council's Code of Conduct, or making other potentially defamatory statements. Councillors and Council staff must declare and manage any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to any item of business that is subject to the meeting agenda this evening. We start off with apologies. All councillors are present. General Manager, any staff apologies?
There are none, Mr Mayor.
Declarations of interest. Councillors, any declarations? There are none. General Manager, any staff declarations?
There are none, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. General Manager, confirmation of reports to be considered in closed meeting.
Mr Mayor and councillors, there is one confidential report, C1, New South Wales Heritage Act 1977, together with attachments 1 and 2. And there are attachments for 7 other reports on the agenda. GB 10, Marion Street Theatre, attachments 1 and 2. GB 11, divestment of council land at 47 Warrane Road, Roseville Chase, evaluation 1, attachment 1. GB 12, council land, 97 Babbage Road, Roseville Chase, attachment 2. GB 13, Ku-ring-gai High School, Northern Sydney and Beaches Hockey Association proposal to upgrade existing facilities, attachments 5 and 6. GB 19, RFT 4 2022, Kendall Village Play Space upgrade, attachments 1 and 2. GB 20, RFT 5 2022, Robert Pimble Park Play Space upgrade, attachments 1 and 2. And GB 21, RFT 6 2022, Dukes Green Play Space upgrade, attachments 1 and 2.
Thank you, General Manager. We need to move to those remaining confidential. Moves Councillor Spencer, seconded Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Confirmation of minutes of the previous council meeting. Moved Councillor Spencer, seconded Councillor Wheatley. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Documents circulated to councillors. General Manager.
Mr Mayor and councillors, just the Greens, late councillors' information. One memorandum from the Director Operations of today's date in relation to GB6 project status report. Do I table declaration? No, not yet.
Nothing else? Beautiful. Thank you. Okay. We move to minutes from the Mayor, and there are none this month. Petitions. We have currently in the business papers, we have one petition, which is PT1, in relation to the Clara Lawn Tennis Club. And Councillor Lennon, you're moving that the petition be received and referred to the appropriate officer for attention. Thank you, Councillor Lennon. Second, Councillor Ward. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Councillor Spencer, you have a petition.
Yes, I do, Mr Mayor. This is a residents' petition opposing the NSFA's DA 0484/21. Now, this petition is from the people of North Turramurra, comprising residents, businesses, and members of the golf club as well. So there are a total of nearly 1,000 signatures, 960 to be exact, on 94 pages. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, I would like the General Manager to confirm that this would be lodged with the KLPP.
Director Myerson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, correct. That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
And for safekeeping, it's in a
So it's in a secret envelope and
It's
all
a
sealed up.
secret red
Excellent,
envelope.
excellent. We need a seconder for that petition. Seconded, Councillor Kay. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Spencer. We move into general business. And I invite councillors to nominate any item on the agenda that they wish to have a site inspection. Councillor Spencer.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. GB10, site inspection.
You're moving a site inspection for GB10, councillors, which is in regards to the Marion Street Theatre. Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded, Councillor Kay. Do we need to speak on that? All those in favour of the site inspection on Marion Street Theatre? We have Councillor Spencer, Councillor Kay, Councillor Alec Taylor, Councillor Kim Wheatley, Councillor Greg Taylor, Councillor Sam Nye and Councillor Pettit. Those against? Councillors Ward, Smith and Lennon. That is carried for the site inspection. Right. I would also like to invite councillors to nominate any items on the agenda that they wish to adopt in accordance with the officer's recommendations, allowing for minor changes without debate. Councillor Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. GB1, officer's recommendation.
Moved Councillor Spencer, seconded Councillor Greg Taylor. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB2, sorry?
One moment, Councillor.
So, Councillor Spencer, just in relation to GB2, councillors, I do have the register here tonight to be tabled. But Councillor Spencer's moving.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, General Manager.
GB2, officer's recommendation with the, that thing that's tabled.
The Register of Disclosures. That was the wording you were looking for. It. Excellent. Seconded, Councillor Kay. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB3, officer's recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB4, officer's recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Ward. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB5, officer's recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB6, officer's recommendation.
With the late memorandum.
Yes,
Thank you, Councillor
Thank you.
Spencer. Seconded, Councillor Smith. All those in favour? Thank you.
GB7, sorry, good. GB7, officer's recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB8, officer's recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Kay. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB9, officer's recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Greg Taylor. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
So we don't have GB10.
Correct.
So should I leave GB11 and 12?
Yes, you can do that. Councillor Spencer.
I'll skip GB11 and 12. GB13, officer's recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Kay. All those in favour?
Sorry, could you just repeat which GB item you just moved?
We're at GB13,
Apparently we're
the
at
Hockey.
GB13.
Okay. All those in favour? GB 13, we're at the hockey. Okay. We have in favour Councillor Spencer, Councillor Kay, Councillor Wheatley, are you for or against the officer's recommendation on? I'll just pause there for a moment, then I'll retake it. We're all good? I'll just
Try again.
try
GB
again.
13, officer's recommendation.
Which is seconded by Councillor Kay. All those in favour? We have Councillor Spencer, Councillor Kay, Councillor Smith, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Nye, Councillor Pettit. Against? Councillor Taylor, Councillor Wheatley, Councillor Greg Taylor and Councillor Barbara Ward. That is carried.
I'll leave GB 14.
Want to withdraw that?
He's already... Yep.
I'm not moving.
He's not moving it, so all good.
GB 15, officer's recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Kay. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB 16, officer's recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB 17, officer's recommendation.
Withdrawn.
Withdrawn by Councillor Alec Taylor.
GB 18, officer's recommendation.
Somebody there on the flood risk want to... Councillor Greg Taylor, thank you. All those in favour? That's unanimous.
GB 19, officer's recommendation.
We're now into the second book, councillors, which is predominantly the tenders. Seconded Councillor Kay. All those in favour? That's unanimous.
GB 20, officer's recommendation.
Councillor Kay. Seconded. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB 21, officer's recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Nye. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB 22, officer's recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB 23, officer's recommendation.
Withdrawn.
Withdrawn by Councillor Smith.
GB 24, officer's recommendation.
Withdrawn.
Withdrawn by Councillor Smith.
And that sums it up, I think.
We do have the confidential C1.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Councillor
C1.
Spencer?
C1,
Yes. Moved by Councillor Spencer, seconded by Councillor Kay. C1 is the heritage item, councillors, if you're not quite sure. I can see some people flicking, so I'll just hold back a little moment. Okay, all those in favour? That is unanimous.
and that's it.
That's
Thank
it. Well done, Councillor Spencer. Councillors, that brings us back to GB 11. And Councillor Smith.
Mr Mayor, I would like to move a motion on GB 11.
And your motion is?
My motion, I believe you should have a copy of that, if I could just get you to bring it up. Really, the only thing what I'm moving here is I'm looking at moving the wording of such as Marion Street Theatre upgrade. That's the only wording, but I'll bring that up.
So, councillors, as that's being brought up on the
So
screen.
it's on current. It's on point E
Yep.
of GB 11. So basically all it is, it's a small change, that the net proceeds from the sale of 47 Warriner Road, Roseville, Chase be allocated to Council's infrastructure and facilitates reserve and utilised for projects budgeted to be funded from asset sales.
Okay, so I need a seconder for that. Seconded, Councillor Kay. Councillor Smith, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, it's pretty straightforward. I think the problem that we've got whenever we're selling assets and tying it into a particular item, I think it just makes it a lot more straightforward just to remove the wording there of Marion Street Theatre. And that's basically all that's been removed out of that, my motion.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. As seconder, Councillor Kay.
I'll reserve my right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillors, speakers on to this particular motion. Councillor Nye.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move an alternate motion, but I just want to check first whether Councillors Smith and Kay want to speak to the current motion first.
Councillor Nye, you will be moving an amendment.
Yes, I propose to move an amendment, but I want to check to see if there's willingness to speak to the current motion first.
Councillor Smith has already spoken as a first time to it, so
Okay, sorry.
that's okay.
In that case, I propose to move an alternate motion.
An amendment,
which-
Councillor
an
Nye?
amendment.
That's okay, no
on
problems
the
with the
screen.
wording.
If the staff press Control F1, you can see more on the page. Now, so we move, point A, that Council does not approve the divestment of 47 Lorraine Road by public auction once the land is formally zoned to R2 in the KLEP 2015. The reasons for this are threefold. One, auction of R2 leads to a significant loss of ratepayer value and free money for property developers. A recent letter by the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment has stated that it is supportive of landowners and property developers who seek R3 in Roseville Chase, 16th of July 2021. Point two, there is significant unmet demand for active and passive recreation space in the LGA, and retaining at least part of 47 Lorraine Road for recreation is a cost-effective means of meeting the demand. And point three, there is a precedent set by other Sydney Metro councils to retain bowling club sites for recreation. Examples include West Epping Bowling in Hornsby, Denniston East Bowling in Ryde, Northbridge Bowling in Willoughby, Tarman Bowling in Willoughby, North Manly Bowling in Northern Beaches, Kensington Bowling at Randwick, and Camperdown Bowling in Marrickville. And then point B, that after this council meeting, councillors and council officers should discuss options for maximising ratepayer value with the objective of determining an approach by May or June. Options to include point one, a planning proposal to rezone the entire site at R3. Point two, a planning proposal to rezone most of the land at R3 while retaining part of it for recreation. And point three, retention of the entire site for recreation. Do we have a seconder?
Thank you, Councillor Nye. And a seconder, Councillor Alex Taylor. Councillor Nye, you have the call.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So basically there's two components or two questions that we should ask. The first question is, should we sell this bowling club site? And the second question is, if we do decide to sell the bowling club site, how should we sell the bowling club site? Now, on the first point, should we sell it? I've listed already in this amendment that it is quite unusual for a council to sell bowling club sites. All of our neighbouring councils have opted to retain their bowling club sites and use it for recreation. And personally, I have been approached by a number of sporting groups and also residents to explore ways of retaining such a large parcel of land, or even just part of the parcel of land, for recreation purposes. If we look back a few years, back in 2017, NESROC, which is a combination of 8 Northern Sydney regional councils, we investigated whether there's sufficient regional sports ground facilities across the Northern Sydney region. And the answer was that no, there was not. In fact, within the next 14 years now, we're going to be 40% short of what of meeting the demand of sporting facilities across Northern Sydney. So that is my view on whether or not to sell. I personally believe, and so do many other residents and many other sporting groups, that it would not be wise to sell the bowling club site as it is. It would be better to retain the site for recreation or to retain part of the site for recreation, and that is the precedent set by our surrounding councils. Now, the second question, though, and more importantly, because I get the sense that the majority of councillors here on the floor do wish to sell the site, the second question is whether or not we should sell it as R2, low density residential, through an auction process. Now, to that, I'd like to draw people's attention to this letter issued to Ku-ring-gai Council from the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment.
Sorry, point of order.
Point of order, Councillor Spencer.
Mr. Mayor, firstly, no props are allowed, and this is the second item that was displayed. It's not been circulated to councillors for debate. Thank you.
Councillor Spencer, can you refer to props? Because I might be at an angle where I'm not being able to see it.
I believe the general manager would remember the basketball.
Yes, I do recall the basketball, yes, being bounced, yes.
Okay, I won't show a prop, but we've sort of had the timer run for 40 seconds, so we've got an extra 40 seconds here.
I'm sure we can fix the timer.
Now, according to a letter issued to us 9 months ago from the State Department of Planning, they have said in point 6 that council should investigate providing medium density options throughout Ku-ring-gai, including Roseville Chase. And furthermore, it says that if council does not investigate medium density in Roseville Chase, that it is welcome and open to proposals by landowners and developers for sensible medium density in Roseville Chase and in other suburbs. Now, what I believe will happen is if we as a council sell this, if we decide that we are to sell, and if we decide to sell it as R2 at an auction, yes, we will get a certain amount of money. That amount of money is disclosed, potential amount of money is disclosed in the confidential attachment. However, what will quite likely happen is after the parcel of land is sold, we're going to have property developers putting forward another planning proposal. They will refer to this letter, which I'm not allowed to show, but is publicly available. And they'll say, look, even you yourselves, the Department of Planning, in July 2021 have said you are open to medium density in this area. I firmly believe that when whoever wins and wins the auction at R2, gets the land, that is their first step. They will ask for R3, and I firmly believe that whichever department is in place at that point in time, when the planning proposal goes through, the land will be rezoned to R3. The residents of Roseville Chase will have to put up with R3 in the area. And the saddest part of all is that Ku-ring-gai Council and the ratepayers have only gotten the value of the site at R2 instead of the full value of the site at R3. And we're talking potentially double the funds there. So I do not support the sale of the bowling club site. However, if we are to sell it, and if we recognise a real threat here that it's going to become R3 anyway, shouldn't the ratepayers be the ones who get the full financial benefit of the site at R3? If we get the full site at R3, in fact, we'd have a lot more funding available to manage some potential loans, such as those linked with St. Ives or Marion Street or whatever. But if we just sell it as R2, we're just leaving it a legacy of you know, we sold the land at minimum value. We gave a free handout to a property developer. It's just fiscally irresponsible, and I cannot support it.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Alec Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Selling the open community space at 47 Woolrain Road at its current R2 zoning would be a short-sighted, stopgap solution that our community would pay for decades to come. Demand for open space over the next decade will continue to increase as development is imposed on Ku-ring-gai. Land has already become prohibitively expensive for the council to purchase and convert into community space. This open space that we're talking about today in Roseville Chase could be utilised for a wide range of community facilities, including a park, multi-use sporting facility, community garden, the list goes on and on. Unfortunately, the Roseville Chase community and Ku-ring-gai more broadly has not been asked what they would like to do with the site. At the same time, the area currently has no accessible space. The Director of Operations recently confirmed that the nearest oval is only accessible by vehicle. It is also dominated by sporting groups and is unsuitable for casual recreation. Selling the open community space at Roseville Chase would also be a very poor deal for Ku-ring-gai, as it is only zoned at R2, as Councillor Nye has pointed out. It would generate a very poor return for the sale of open community land. It is also highly likely to be rezoned at R3 by a private developer and will therefore be a far worse outcome for residents while losing the value for Ku-ring-gai. There are alternative funding opportunities available to address the infrastructure backlog and to fund new investments. Addressing those opportunities would avoid the need to sell the open space in Roseville Chase, and some of them could be completed in this term if we had the resolve to follow through and get on with it. If we have to sell something, it shouldn't be open space zoned at R2. Selling the open space in Roseville Chase would be a short-sighted stopgap solution that our community would pay for decades to come. So I ask you please to support Councillor Nye's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Smith.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, could I ask a question through you to the Director of Strategy, please?
Absolutely, ask away.
Could you please, Director Watson, how many years has it actually taken to prepare the Roseville Bowling Club for sale to where we are, well, not for sale, preparing to get it to this point where we have today, that's before council?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't know precisely, but for example, the reclassification was finalised in 2013. So to get to that point would have been through a public hearing process and what have you, would have been at least a year and a half. So we're talking fairly close to 9 or 10 years in total, I would think, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. If I could just a couple more questions back to the Director. What do you think the cost to the ratepayers of Ku-ring-gai has it cost us to get it to this point where we are here this evening?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I can't answer that question because I don't have all the figures in front of me, but just the preparation of the planning proposal has taken several years, and between this one and Pennant Avenue, close to $500,000 between the two of them. Now, before that, this particular site would have had the reclassification hearing, so add that on top. But several years and $500,000 for the two planning proposals that Council currently has afoot for bowling clubs.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. And also, is the Roseville Bowling Club, it's not recreational land at the moment, it is a bowling club that's for paid members, so I just wanted to clarify that. But in any case, is the bowling club in a position where we are currently looking for open space with residents that have been hit with the type of development that's happened in the last few years?
Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question.
Are we searching for land in this area for recreational space around this bowling club area?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Mr Mayor, if I may, while I'm up, just so as I'm not jumping up and down, if you don't mind, if I could just ask a question to Councillor Nye.
Absolutely.
Councillor Nye, are you this evening here putting it to the residents of Ku-ring-gai that you would much prefer to see this land at the Roseville Bowling Club be sold as R3 instead of being sold as R2 that it currently is at the moment? It's a pretty straightforward question. Yes or no will be fine. Thank you.
Councillor Nye?
A yes or no, it's not as simple as a yes or no. So if I have permission to expand on an answer, I'm happy to answer. But if it's a yes or no, that's somewhat disrespectful. It cannot be answered by a simple yes or no. I can give a more expanded answer, however.
Councillor Nye, I gather you're trying to give a qualified yes or a qualified no?
I would prefer to see the land as fully recreation. However, in light of the new evidence from 9 months ago, I would rather it be sold as R3 rather than it to be sold at R2 and then have it rezoned by a private property developer as R3, because at least that way the people of Ku-ring-gai get the full value from the site. And I do believe that R3 is quite likely in light of the evidence that is before us.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Smith?
Yes, thanks you, Mr Mayor. Just another question back to Councillor Nye. Considering that he expanded on that question that I asked, I might actually just expand on a little bit further. So, Councillor Nye, what you're basically saying here this evening is that in the case of the risk of a developer wanting to take it to R3, you would like to guarantee to make sure that we sell it as R3, and you feel that the residents that are living around this bowling club would be happy with your decision here this evening on that.
Councillor Nye?
When I speak to residents in the area, many of them do not want R3 in the area. However, they do acknowledge that there is a potential threat of R3 that's quite clear. I'm quite certain from a letter that was available 9 months ago. However, I think it's also clear from residents, not just residents in Roseville Chase, but across all of Ku-ring-gai, that if we are to sell it at R2, and then it ends up being developed as R3 anyway, and we lose $10 to $15 million because of such a decision, then I'm pretty certain that residents will not look lightly on any councillor who made that decision for R2.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Smith?
Mr Mayor, I'll just expand on that again. I'll just make this question a little bit more straightforward. Basically, from what I can see here tonight, you are either trying to crystallise that the residents are faced with R3 where they could potentially have R2. And from what I understand, I'll just ask this to be a yes or no. You would rather us as a council push this through as R3 than us to sell it to a developer where there's an opportunity that it can be developed as R2. I just need you to answer that yes or no. Thank you.
Councillor Nye?
A yes or no is a trick question. The real answer is I would prefer it to be fully recreational. Alternately, I'd prefer it to be part recreation, part R3. And then second to that, third to that, yes, R3 is an inevitability from my perspective based on the evidence that is before us from a letter 9 months ago.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Smith?
Mr Mayor, I'll ask Councillor Nye just one more time. Just one more time. I'm just asking. It's a very straightforward question. We have the opportunity here as a council to support this moving forward where we may have a developer that purchases this property and develops it at R2. I'm now asking you that so that you can face your residents when the time comes that we do not sell it and you're happy with the position for us not to sell it with the risk of forcing it to an R3 and you're satisfied and you believe the residents around this are going to be happy to be faced with a definite R3 rather than a possible R2. Is that yes or no?
Councillor Nye?
it's not a possible R2. Look at the evidence. You know that it's not a possible R2. It's very, very likely to be R3. And yes, in the short term, there will be anger, but in the long term, there will be even more anger at council if we sell it as R2 and then it is developed as R3. Residents will be asking, where is that money? Where's that extra 10 to 15 that you've just thrown away?
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Kay, you waited a while. Fire away.
Okay, so through you, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Nye, I've got a couple of questions. Just in relation to the amendment, so part A, you've got A and then 3. There is a precedent set by other Sydney metropolitan councils to retain bowling club sites for recreation. Now, you've listed the councils. Can you maybe expand a little bit further on the type of recreation that these bowling clubs? Thank you.
Councillor Nye.
Yes, so what we see is a range. Many councils have decided to retain the bowling club building for use either as a cafe or for use as a venue that you can book and hire out to the community. Many councils have then looked at the open space component and used it for community gardens or used it for sport or use it for, you know, like just passive recreation, even dog park, things like that. If you look at Ku-ring-gai Council even, what we have, at least in West Linfield, is we've taken a disused bowling site and we've turned it into sporting facilities. But yeah, there is a range. The building's usually used for community or cafe booking, and the open space is then usually used for passive recreation, used for active sports, or used for community gardens.
I've got another question.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Kay,
Got
another question? Yes.
If we could just scroll up slightly on the GB item. So as far as I'm aware, we've got B. Okay, so B says that after this council meeting, councillors and council officers should discuss options for maximising ratepayer value with the objection of determining an approach by May or June. I believe, if I stand corrected, that Councillor Nye is advising us to look at options. So we're not just, Councillor Nye has not just highlighted R3, he's also highlighted retention of the entire site for recreation. So in my belief, this is a little bit more expansive than pigeonholing Councillor Nye into accepting R3 only.
Thank you.
Councillor Nye, can you clarify that that is the case?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Kay. Councillor Nye?
Yes, Councillor Kay, I believe that we should look at more options, that we should look at the evidence in front of us and think, okay, is there a way of getting more value out of this site? And what is the probability of it being R3 if a developer were to purchase it at R2? These are questions which we haven't fully explored, as far as I can tell, and I'd like to see the governing body take some time, consider all the information before them, and before we make a decision. If we make this decision, like to do R2 in a month or two's time after considering more information before us, that's fine. But I don't think we have all the information before us, and given the size of this potential divestment, I don't think it's right to make the decision now.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions, please.
Fire away with your questions.
So the first one is to Councillor Smith. Through you, may I borrow your question that you asked Councillor Nye? Thank you. And the next question is to Councillor-elect Taylor, who seconded this motion. The question from Councillor Smith.
So it's the same question being
Same question, thank you.
asked
He
to
did
both.
give me permission, though.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Councillor Smith, perhaps you should have had it written down so you could have passed it to Councillor Spencer. But anyway, I'm sure you'll be able to recant it.
Okay, Councillor Taylor, I think I've said it enough. I should be able to work the words out again. Considering you're the councillor of Roseville Ward, are you happy for, as part of what this amendment has been put forward, that do you believe that the residents of Roseville are going to be happy for us as a council to ensure that we turn this area into an R3, as basically as per the amendment? Or do you think the residents of Roseville would be happy with the opportunity of going to market of R2, where you've got a developer that may think that they can actually earn some quite good money out of just building normal homes in Roseville?
Thank you.
Councillor Alec Taylor first.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I reject the premise of the question. I think R3 is an inevitability. I don't think that if we sell it at R2, that it would be developed at R2. There's a problem with the question.
I'll now go to Councillor Nye because the question was put by Councillor Spencer to both the Roseville Ward councillors. Councillor Nye, would you like to answer Councillor Spencer's question?
So is that what Councillor Smith just asked?
Yes, it is, yes.
Based on the evidence before me, I do believe that R3 is an inevitability. Whether or not we want as a council to be the ones to do it, or whether we allow a property developer to do it, is a separate question. But it is quite likely going to happen, and if we sell it as R2, we're going to lose at least $10 to $15 million from this.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Spencer?
A couple more questions, please.
Indeed.
Now, if the director could refresh my memory, please. If we pass, so let's say if we supported this amendment and it is passed, then the land is automatically R3. Is that correct?
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the answer to that is no. Council would need to restart a fresh planning proposal to take in elements of 1, 2 and or 3, depending on what that discussion came up with and what Council subsequently resolved. I think what's been forgotten here today, though, Mr Mayor, is that the first time Council submitted this planning proposal, it was in fact for R3, and that was rejected by conditions on the gateway determination, which said you have to make it R2. So that certainly does not necessarily gel with the inevitability argument that's been put here tonight.
No, and before, I must concur with that. We did try R3, they come back and said R2, so the inevitability of R3 is certainly not there. Councillor Spencer.
So I can't understand, I might be a bit slow tonight, how could passing of this amendment then immediately rezone the land into R3? If I remember correctly, rezoning of land would have to come back to council.
Director?
And it's not just by passing a, oh sorry.
Through you, Mr Mayor, that's correct. It would have to come back to Council, it would go back to the KLPP, it would come back to Council, it would go back on public exhibition, it would come back to Council. I think we worked out in terms of the guidelines for our new planning proposals, that's a 300-day process plus.
So we'll, just following on from that, Director, it's basically going back to ground zero and we start the costs and the time clock all over again.
Sorry, just a last question if I may.
Councillor Spencer?
So, you see, because I'm really confused, some councillors are suggesting that if we pass this tonight, it will become R3. I can't see how, can someone tell me how that could possibly happen? Thank you.
Through you, General Manager, and I think anybody might want to have a little go at that to say...
Through you, Mr Mayor,
Yes.
it doesn't happen that way.
It doesn't happen that way. There you go. Pretty simple. Any further speakers? At this point in... Councillor Nye, you have questions? Good lad, Councillor Nye. Oh, sorry, but Councillor Smith, sorry, you have questions.
Thank you. I just would like to clarify a point through you, Mr Mayor, through Director Watson. There's been some commentary around that Council literally made a decision just to move forward with what we've proposed. Can you please advise what we did in order to come up with what we have on the Roseville Bowling Club in its state today? Like what the process was, what the investigations were done.
So you're looking after basically a brief snapshot,
A brief snapshot, it doesn't have to be...
in depth. Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, as I alluded to before, there was a separate reclassification process. We originally did some work around a R3 outcome, which we submitted to was then Minister Roberts the first time he was Planning Minister, I think from memory. No, it was Minister Stokes at the time.
Stokes.
It sat in the department's office for several years before we got back the conditional, I'll call it a refusal, but the move back to R2. And since then we had to, that first planning proposal process was terminated because of the new KPIs that the department imposed on the process. So we had to restart the process afresh as an R2 proposition only. So we've looked at R2, we've looked at R3, we've looked at seniors living, we've done modelling and valuations on both, and that's how we have come to R2, bearing in mind that this whole process started because the club in fact terminated their licence arrangements with us and handed back the keys with effectively no notice. So it wasn't necessarily a position we had courted, we were forced into it when the club folded. Very similar, if not exactly the same circumstances down in Pennant Avenue occurred about the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Smith?
Mr Mayor, I'll be speaking against this amendment for many reasons. This is part of recycling assets, which as a council and the council prior, we made a decision that we needed to do so we can fund the likes of the projects, the likes of Marion Street Theatre and so forth. The other reason is that it's time. It's just time. We've been here, we've done this, we've done it again. I think the argument that Councillor Nye and also I believe that Councillor Taylor is supporting, that the residents are going to end up with R3, I think we've all heard here tonight that's not the case. We tried that didn't work. So I think that this is going to be a good outcome for the residents of Ku-ring-gai, and I think that we just need to move forward and do our business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Knight, your follow-up questions?
Yes. A question through to Director of Strategy. When Council's previous planning proposal for R3 was turned down and we were told to do R2, when was that? Which year was it?
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, off the top of my head, I couldn't answer that question, but it would be several years. It would have been at the beginning of the last term of the last council.
Approximately, yes.
So potentially 2018 or 2019 is that?
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, off the top of my head, I can't answer the question.
My second question is this letter that we received in response to the local housing strategy dated 16th of July 2021. Is that new advice that supports R3 in Roseville Chase, is that new advice more recent than this other decline previously of R3 previously? So which came first? The advice that R3 is not supported or the advice that R3 could be considered? Which came first, which came subsequent?
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I haven't seen the prop, but I understand it, if it's the letter I understand it to be, what council and the last council has done on 2 occasions is reject outright all of the conditions therein. So it's not my position to challenge lawful decisions of this council from February this year and the last council from November last year.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Nye?
Another question, in this said letter, point 6, is it correct to say that the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment basically said that if council is not willing to explore these options by December 2023, they are open to landowners and property developers making sensible place-based proposals for R3 in these areas?
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, landowners and property developers had that right prior to that letter being signed and dated. That letter, in fact, doesn't add any new rights to the package of rights that people already had.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Nye.
So, however, having point 6 of the letter say this, does it potentially show an indication from the department that there may be a change of heart as to how to best meet the needs of residents in the LGA?
Councillor Nye. Director.
That would require me to speculate, Mr Mayor.
That's fair enough. Councillor Nye.
Okay, and final question. If, and this may be for the General Manager, I don't know who it's most appropriate. If Council were to support this amendment today, and if it's resolved, is it possible for us to spend more time, digest information in front of us, and then maybe in 1 month or 2 months' time decide that actually we certainly believe that R3 is not real, let's do R2. So can we make the decision again for R2 in a few months' time if we defer the decision now?
General Manager.
Yes, you could.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kay.
Okay, this is a question through you, General Manager, which I know you did answer for me, but maybe the relevant director. So in relation to going from, we're talking about developer benefits. So if we're going from an R2 to an R3, what clauses can be added to this site if the developer goes from R2 to R3 so that council will have a return on the planning proposal rezone change? And how is that process managed if we have the ability to do that?
General Manager.
Madam Mayor and Councillors, Director Watson may wish to supplement, but you can put a clause in there that you share any uplift subsequently made by the developer post-purchase. That can be done, but obviously you don't get the full benefit of what that uplift is. It'd be, half-half, but that can be done.
Thank you, General Manager. Councillor Kay.
So we're talking about a 50% benefit, would that be on average? Obviously I can't discuss figures.
Director Watson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, it really depends on other conditions in a contract, and prior to auction anybody can ask to add or detract conditions from or retract conditions from a contract. But if a developer was putting up all of the money up front and taking all of the risk on the rezoning, you wouldn't necessarily expect 50-50. But if there was things like deferred settlements to allow these processes to occur, then you might extract more from the process. So it really depends on the package of conditions that go into a contract. Bearing in mind they can all be challenged and altered prior to you can have any number of different contracts out prior to an auction and they're all slightly different.
Okay, so
Thank you, Director.
Just to clarify, where would this, if we were to do that, where would this happen in the process now that we're at, what stage we're at? So is that something that the General Manager does as part of his negotiations, or is that something that has to come back to us, or is that something we can consider?
Director.
Watson?
Through you, Mr Mayor, those are things that would probably have to be determined by council prior to an auction date. And whatever happens with this matter tonight, it's not as if it's going to auction or to market tomorrow. There would be time for council to contemplate conditions of it that go on a contract. Special condition.
Thank you.
Councillor Spencer.
Thank you. I'm going to speak to this amendment. So very briefly, I've asked a few questions. So it appears that we're not, this council is not in favour of rezoning this land to R3. And it is currently an R2 land. So that is a fact, and it's real. The land would become R3 might be an aspiration or illusionary. So I cannot support this amendment because I'm not in favour of rezoning it to R3. And therefore, we have 2 for and 2 against.
Mr Mayor, you've got Councillors Nye and Taylor for the amendment and Councillors Smith and Spencer against, yes.
We do have 2 for and 2 against, so
May I ask another question?
no, we do have a procedural motion there that the motion be put. Okay, so for those new councillors that are unaware, we've had 2 speakers, 2 for, 2 against the procedural motion that the amendment be put. And we just put it. And all we do is just put the amendment, which is Councillor Nye's amendment. Yep. We are just voting, not voting for the amendment, we're voting that there be no further debate. Okay? So all those in favour? Councillor Spencer, Wheatley.
Mr Mayor, I didn't quite get your remarks, sorry.
Okay. So with the 2 for, 2 against, we now are voting whether to end debate. Okay. So all those in favour? Councillor Spencer, Councillor Wheatley, Councillor Ward, Councillor Smith, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Pettit. Those against? Councillors Kay, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Nye. Declare that we now put the amendment, which is Councillor Nye's amendment, which is on the board. We're all clear with that now? Good. Nodding is good. Okay. All those in favour of Councillor Nye's amendment? Councillor Kay, Councillor Alec Taylor, Councillor Greg Taylor, Councillor Nye. Those against? Councillors Spencer, Wheatley, Ward, Smith, Lennon and Pettit. Declare the amendment lost. We now move back to Councillor Smith's motion. And we can either put it, or Councillor Smith, if you wish to sum up.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'll sum up. As I alluded to initially there, on GB 11, basically all I've removed is some wording. Do you want to bring that motion up on GB 11? That on point E, that the net proceeds for the sale of 47 Warrenay Road, Roseville Chase be allocated to Council's Infrastructure and Facilities Reserve and utilised for projects budgeted to be funded from asset sales. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? Councillors Spencer, Wheatley, Ward, Smith, Lennon and Pettit. Those against? Councillors Councillor Kay, Councillor Alec Taylor, Councillor Greg Taylor, Councillor Nye. I declare that motion carried. Councillors, we move on to GB 12. And that was withdrawn by Councillor Smith.
Mr Mayor, I would like to move a motion on GB 12. If we could just please have that brought up onto the screen for everybody to view. It is along the same vein as GB 11, that the new wording removes such as funding Marion Street Theatre upgrade. The wording will be, what I'm proposing it to be on GB 12, that the net proceeds for the sale of 97 Babbage Road, Roseville Chase be allocated to Council's Infrastructure and Facilities Reserve and utilised for projects budgeted to be funded from asset sales. Again, all I've removed on this is the point there which says such as funding the Marion Street Theatre upgrade. Thank you.
And seconder for that, I see Alec Taylor, you're seconding that? Seconded Councillor Ward. Councillor Smith, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. Look, I believe what the amendment that I've made here is the motion that I've put forward here is very straightforward. It's removed that wording, and I would just recommend that we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Seconder, Councillor Ward, do you wish to speak?
Thank you.
You'll reserve your right.
Did you not hear me? Sorry. Sorry.
That's okay. A little bit closer to the microphone always helps. It's all good. Speakers on this matter. Councillor Alec Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move an amendment.
So you're moving an amendment. Councillor Taylor, fire
I
away.
believe staff have the amendment on file. My amendment is that staff bring an urban design study report back to council prior to sale, which considers how 97 Babbage Road could be developed.
And it's a very simple amendment. And seconder for that, Councillor Nye. Councillor Taylor.
So very simply, 97 Babbage Road is a small and inaccessible lot perched on a steep raised block. It has existing trees and riparian areas that will restrict development. It may not even be feasible to build on this site. I am a little perplexed about why we have spent so much time and energy trying to sell this tiny little block. But regardless, let's investigate how or even whether a reasonable dwelling could be developed on the site before we decide to sell it.
As seconder.
Thank you. I'll try to be short. This goes back to a debate in July 2021, where we were discussing whether to create a report on the environmentals of the site. During that meeting, if you look at July 2021, slightly after the 2-hour mark, I asked the then Mayor, Emeritus Mayor Anderson, that, what can we reasonably build on the site after you factor in that it's environmental land, after you factor in the FSR, after you factor in the height requirements, after you factor in all of the existing trees that are on the site, after you factor in the inaccessibility, after you factor in the setback requirements of where you are or aren't allowed to build relative to the boundaries. And after you factor in the fact that there's riparian land right in the middle, what can you realistically do with the site and how much will it cost? And when I asked that question, the then mayor answered that that could be included as part of the report. And now this report has come to us. It doesn't really talk about what could realistically be built on this site. And so then that affects our understanding as governing body of the valuation of the property, what could be supported here without fully desecrating the site, impacting the trees, impacting other things like that. I just want to ensure that we as a governing body are making decisions based on all of the relevant information that is required before us. I'm not convinced that this small parcel of land can support much more than, say, a granny flat, or maybe something slightly larger, up to 200 square meters, without significantly impacting what is there, and without potentially something questionable and against our DCP, etc., being done. So yeah, I think it's important for us to know what can be achieved on the site before we proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Kay.
Through you, Mr Mayor, to the relevant director, which I believe is Director Watson. We talk about a urban design study here. How long would that take to produce, and when could that come back to council?
Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think the more relevant question is such a study required at all? The ecological assessment has been based on council's existing planning controls. The valuation report has been based on council's existing planning controls, and existing planning controls are all in the DCP. So everything that is required is already on the public record. The valuation report, and it's certainly not disclosing anything that's confidential, calculates the FSR for the site at 120 square metres. So you're not getting a very big building, you're getting 120 square metres of floor space, probably over 2 stories. And as for how that looks, that would be predetermining a development application process that a potential purchaser would go through and answer these questions themselves in a pre-DA process having done their own due diligence. I can do, well, like I said, everything's already on the public record. I can give you an answer as to what that looks like, but there's no guarantee that somebody will build and won't challenge and won't test controls in the DCP. So I don't think an urban design study or a town planning report that's been put to me in a number of different ways in the last couple of weeks is warranted at all. It's an existing lot with a dwelling entitlement, and the dwelling entitlement takes it to about 120 square metres. So it's whatever that person can get through the DA process, bearing in mind all of the controls and all of the restrictions on the site, which are all on the public record. I wasn't asked to design a house. I was asked to do an ecological assessment.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Kay.
Okay, so just to clarify, I would imagine that more could be built than a granny flat. Would that be correct? So from your experience, would we say a small 3-bedroom house?
120 square metres is a small 3-bedroom house, creatively put. You get views of the water from the second storey, so it'll be a very nice, you know, not waterfront, but water view property in Roseville Chase.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Smith.
Mr Mayor, through you to Director Watson, you've answered a couple of my questions, but I'm just going to sort of take you back again, apologies, to some of the same line of questions that I asked you prior. What period of time, when did the council first, the previous councils first proposed to sell this property? Proposed to put this forward for reclassification?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, again, it's exactly the same answer I gave in relation to Warrane Road. I can't tell you exactly when it started, but the reclassification was sorted in 2013 when Warrane Road was. Now, there was a resolution of council, I think, from 2017 to sell it, but we had to come back to council to report the method and means of sale. So this one has been on the books for, again, close to 10 years.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. And just another question, how many additional reports has a council, not this council, but the previous council and other councils, requested to be done on this property?
Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, a lot of reports get done as a matter of process, so there would have been a plethora of information put together for reclassification hearings. There would have been rezoning matters to be dealt with, but particularly late or the middle of last year, as alluded to by Councillor Nye, we were specifically asked to prepare the Ecological Report, which effectively debunked a lot of the claims that had been made about this property. So the ecological issues around this site have been particularly looked at a number of times, and there of course has been a number of valuations over time as well.
Thank you, Director.
So in other words, what you're saying is the previous council's concerns were raised and they've been addressed and that's been answered.
Director.
Yes.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, it's just a follow-on question from Councillor Smith. How much has it cost us so far for the urban design report and everything else?
Director, if you can answer that one approximately, I guess.
Through you, Mr Mayor, again, difficult for me to answer, but we haven't done an urban design report. I don't think we need one, but the Ecological Report was about $6,000, and valuations are a couple of $1,000 a piece.
Thank you, Director. Certainly with this property, it has been on the books for a long time to get to this particular point. For an urban design, well, that's really up to the person that purchases it. Whatever they so desire to put on it, if they decide, they may decide just to land bank it for the next 10, 15 years. We might have some fandangled swish house on there in the future, where it might be very simple. We can't speculate. We haven't got a crystal ball. All we can do is just deal with the facts that has been presented to us for this particular site. there comes a point in time when residents want us to make a decision. I cannot support this amendment. I'm not prepared to speculate what might be put on the site, if anything. Who knows? Perhaps one of the councils might buy it and keep it. Who knows? Anybody could buy it. Who knows? They might want to put a fish pond there and nothing more. Who knows? All right, councillor. So, there being no further speakers on councillor Nye's amendment, if there be speakers, put the light on. Oh, councillor Taylor's amendment, sorry. It's been a while. So we'll put councillor Alec Taylor's amendment. All those in favour? That is councillor Alec Taylor, councillor Greg Taylor, councillor Nye. All those against? Councillors Spencer, Kay, Wheatley, Ward, Smith, Lennon, Pettit. The amendment is lost. We now go back to the motion. Councillor Nye, you wish to speak on Councillor Smith's motion? Yes.
To be honest, I did have an amendment, but I know that we want a short meeting, and I suspect even if I raise an amendment, it'll be defeated. So I'm just going to speak against this motion to
I'm
speed
sorry,
things up.
one second, please. So sorry.
Yes.
Point of order. Could we have the correct one up?
Thank you, councillor Spencer. Councillor Nye, please proceed.
I would like to speak against the motion as it is presently shown. It's clear to me that the majority probably will support the motion as is up here. However, I do have some concerns about the current configuration, or currently what's being done here. Now, one with the valuation, if you look at there is a valuation in the confidential items, but if you look at page 155, it says that there's a market value of the land to be in the $1.5 to $1.6 million range. Now, when I look at that valuation, my gut feel is that, it feels a little bit off. I'll give you a bit of history. I'm not talking about 97 Babbage now, but I'm talking about 90 Babbage Road, which council has previously sold. With 90
Point of
Babbage-
order.
Councillor Smith, point of order.
We're talking about a different property. Aren't we supposed to be talking about this property? So I'm not sure why we're speaking about another property. Like, I could bring up, I'll bring up another property.
I think, councillor Smith, you're looking at relevance on this
Yep, correct.
matter. Councillor Nye, can I keep you focused on
Okay.
the
Yep.
particular property we're discussing?
If you look at the valuation report, which is in the confidential papers, about what this independent valuer has believed the value to be, and which you could sort of see here, 1.5 to 1.6 in the public section of the paper. Think about it, compare it to past land sales in the past. Will someone realistically pay $1.5 to $1.6 million for this, and then spend all the money to clear various trees, build 120 square meters, and then be happy with that, given the significant constraints of this small parcel of land? I don't think so. I feel as though the valuation is off. If you look at other examples in the past, such as the one I'm not allowed to talk about, it certainly indicates that we as council are promised one value, and then we get half of that value realised when it actually happens. I know that, or I suspect that the majority of council will end up voting to support this, but I believe that it's based on not completely accurate information. Only time will tell how much this parcel of land will sell for if it is sold. But I just don't believe the numbers. They look a bit airy-fairy. That valuation report could
Point
be...
of order.
Yeah.
Councillor Smith?
Councillor Nye is making commentary around inaccurate information and alluding to the fact that this information that's been put forward isn't correct. I don't think that...
Councillor Smith, it's probably not a point of order, but I think I can see where you're going with it, that Councillor Nye, possibly a lot of speculation potentially, and I'll just leave my commentary at that.
So I'm just going to jump to the point. I don't believe it's all perfectly aligned. We as a council, we're called to make fully informed decisions. I'm not convinced that that's necessarily happening right now. I am against selling it based on the information that is before us at this point in time. And also, I would invite anyone in the future to visit this parcel of land and imagine if you were able to build up to a second story, would you actually see water views? I challenge anyone to actually go there and have a look, because you'll probably find that the answer is no. I'm just going to leave it at that. The facts aren't quite accurate from my perspective.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Alec Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a question, I think, for the General Manager through you. Does this motion in its current form allow the General Manager to sell the property at any price?
General Manager.
Mr Mayor and councillors, we have to sell the property at a value agreed by council, having regard to the valuation on council's books.
Thank you, General Manager. Councillor Taylor.
So, if, for example, the property was passed in at auction and the highest bid was a very low amount, would the General Manager be authorised to then sell at or near that amount?
General Manager.
Mr Mayor and councillors, prior to going to auction, we would have a report to council for council to confirm the range that we could sell for, and it's usually plus or minus 10% of valuation. If it fell outside that range, the property would be passed in and we'd come back to council.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much. I would like to speak against this motion, and very simply because I think it's immaterial, and I think we've wasted a lot of time and energy on this particular item. And I actually think we shouldn't go to market. I think we should approach affected residents and give them a first right of refusal. But like Councillor Nye, I believe that there is an intent to push on, and so I won't be making an amendment tonight, but merely objecting to the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Spencer.
Thank you. I believe we have spent quite a number of years, if the Mayor would recall, debating this particular property. And therefore, I think it's time for us to make a decision and put an end to this. And I would be supporting this motion. And with that, I believe we have 2 for and 2 against.
Yes, we do, Councillor Spencer. So we now have 2 for, 2 against. So I'll now put that the debate end and we vote on that first. So all those in favour? That is unanimous. We now put the motion by Councillor Smith, which is up on the screen. All those in favour? That is Councillor Spencer, Councillor Kay, Councillor Wheatley, Councillor Smith, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Pettit. Those against? Councillor Alec Taylor, Councillor Greg Taylor, Councillor Barbara Ward, Councillor Nye. I declare the motion carried. On to GB14. We now move on to GB14, which was withdrawn by Councillor Wheatley. Councillor Wheatley, you have the call for a motion.
That the, just the new recommendation that the pop-up cycleway in Gilroy be removed as soon as possible.
And a seconder for that, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Wheatley, do you wish to speak to your motion? Or would you reserve your right on
I
this?
reserve my right.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer, you wish to speak?
I think it's about time to get it removed. I've been against this cycleway since the day it was installed. And with that, I have a question, please. So the motion is, I believe, to remove immediately.
Yes. As soon as possible.
Yes, like tomorrow?
So you say
Relevant director, please. When can
Yes, you're
the-
seeking an
yeah,
approximate timeframe of when the
That's it.
removal
Thank
could
you.
occur. Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the grant application includes funds for removal. They have to be expended by the end of June. So at the latest, it would be the end of June, but we would issue instructions to Director Banassif's team immediately to schedule removal. But it has to be done by the end of the financial year.
All right.
Thank
so
you,
if I
Director.
could-
Councillor
if I may
Spencer.
then, through you to Director Bonassif, how's your timetable looking like?
Director Bonassif?
Mr Mayor, Council, you've approved a number of tenders this evening, which is a good thing, so our program is full. We need to go through a procurement process, my best guess would be a commencement 3 to 4 weeks.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Kay.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Oh, yes, to the relevant director, Director Watson. Now, the cost for removal to council. So if we remove this immediately, what is the cost to council? If we do not vote on removing this today, what would be the approximate cost to council at a later date removal? Director Watson.
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I can't answer that question, but Councillor Kay is correct. If we don't remove it by the end of the financial year, all of the cost to remove subsequently would be council's. I don't know how much that is. Director Bonassif said he would have to go through a procurement process. Part of that would be settling on a price. But at the moment, the funds available to us, and I don't know what's unexpended, but it did take into account removal of everything that had been put there.
Councillor
Okay,
Kay?
another question for you, Director Watson. I believe a cycleway is part of the Turramurra Domain Plan. Does this include Gilroy Road from memory? So if you could just
Director?
refresh me on that. Thank
Yes,
you.
it does.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillor Nye.
Thank you. Continuing on from Councillor Kay's question, so my understanding now is that if the Turramurra Domain Plan were to be implemented in its current form, this cycleway will return in one form or another?
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the public domain plan, as councillors know, is aspirational. It's subject to funding. It's subject to changing public expectations and needs. It may be that a cycleway has its day at some other time, but it certainly doesn't appear to be today.
Thank you,
And
Director.
just a second question. When I look at Gilroy Road and I compare it to another street, which is Sutherland Street in Cremorne, they are both 19.5 metres wide. Both currently have a cycleway, but Sutherland Street supports parking on both sides, whereas Gilroy Road currently does not. Is there a possibility that we as a council can explore in the future a way to support street parking on both sides of Gilroy Road while still providing for a cycleway, perhaps by narrowing the nature strip on both sides?
Director Watson?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Again, I can't answer that question directly. Theoretically, it's possible, but it depends what services have to be relayed, if any, in the nature strip. But technically, Councillor Nye is correct. There is theoretically enough space there to do some quite creative things. But remember, this was a pop-up. We had to work within the existing sealed carriageway rather than the whole reserve.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. Now, I would like to speak in support of Councillor Wheatley's motion. I believe that, in a sense, the trial was not popular, but having said that, from the trial we have gathered data. We know that there is some degree of demand for a cycleway on Gilroy Road. However, we've also seen elsewhere that it is possible to implement a cycleway without impacting street parking elsewhere on a comparable road in the Northern Sydney region. So I would like to support the removal of this temporary cycleway, and when it comes time to implementing the Turramurra Domain Plan, we should investigate options to include a cycleway in a way that doesn't impact residents so significantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Kay. More
Just one
questions?
question, yes,
Oh.
through you, Mr Mayor, to Director Watson. Now, just in relation to car spaces, and if you can clarify how many car spaces have been sacrificed for the Gilroy Road cycleway.
Director?
Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, from memory, I think it was 9 short stay and 42 long stay.
Thank you.
There being no other speakers, I'll have my 2 cents worth. I must congratulate the 2 Ku-ring-gai ward councillors. They have championed removing this cycleway. What seemed like a good idea at the time has proven not to be so. With the wider community, they're not happy with it. To the Ku-ring-gai ward councillors, and I commend that you are taking the step to remove it. The wider community will appreciate it. I, for one, have been up and down Gilroy many times, and I'm yet to see a cyclist. Simple as that. As Councillor and I pointed out, we do have some data now which can be used in the future. It's fairly straightforward, councillors. There being no further speakers, I will put Councillor Wheatley's motion. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Councillors, we move to GB 17, which was the Linfield Local Centre Traffic Management Plan, and that was withdrawn by Councillor Alec Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move a motion that adds a point to the staff recommendation, and I believe that you have it on file. Put simply, it adds point B, which is to engage with representatives of St Albans Church one final time to collaboratively identify any possible and mutually acceptable design for the intersection at Linfield Avenue and Tryon Road. And there is also a minor change to point C, which is to add subsequent to the final engagement with St Albans Church.
That's all good. Happy with that up on the screen, Councillor
Yep,
Taylor? Yes.
thank you.
Do I have a seconder for that? Second, and Councillor Nye. Councillor Taylor, you have the call to speak on it.
Thank you. So we all heard at the public forum last week from the property manager at St Albans Church, Linfield, that the proposed traffic lights at the corner of Linfield Avenue and Tryon Road will greatly restrict vehicle access to the church. The church has a deep history in the community and serves hundreds of parishioners across Ku-ring-gai and beyond. It currently has a corner entrance that connects diagonally to the intersection, which is used by a handful of mobility-challenged parishioners on Sundays, occasional tradesmen during the week, and for occasional weddings and funerals. Contrary to some prevailing views, it is not common practice for vehicles to drive into Linfield Avenue and reverse into the church. I believe that happened once and will not happen again, I'm assured. But more importantly, the church is keen to explore compromises that would greatly restrict access once the traffic lights are installed and protect pedestrian safety. As we heard from the church's property manager last week, and I quote, "The church is willing to compromise and accept reasonable constraints on vehicular access," end quote. What they are asking for is for their century-long right of access to continue. This amended motion merely asks staff to engage with the church in good faith, one last time, to attempt to identify a mutually acceptable solution. And I would ask that you please consider supporting this motion.
Councillor Nye. A seconder? That's all right, no problems.
Sure. I'd like to speak in support of this motion. Look, Linfield now is very different to Linfield 100 years ago. It would have been much easier 100 years ago to enter a driveway from a corner, but now we've got a lot more traffic in the area, and I totally understand why Council and Transport for New South Wales will have some concerns about allowing driveway access at a signalised intersection. However, it's not the only example of corner access in Ku-ring-gai. So I can think of Regimental Park in Killara, which is close to where I used to live. And that also has a driveway for access at the corner of a signalised intersection. It is very rarely used. My understanding is it's only used for utility vehicles. However, it is permitted to be used very occasionally. When I look at the intersection of Linfield Avenue and Tryon Road, I do believe that it is possible to allow entry through the corner driveway and then to have a loop out onto Tryon Road, such that you won't have the very dangerous movement of vehicles backing out onto a signalised intersection, which would cause traffic chaos. I do believe that there are other options that could be explored, that it is worthwhile to have one final conversation with the church to, in good faith, sort of demonstrate that we are trying to have a good relationship with them. And look, if it works out that we couldn't agree on anything, that's fine. I'm totally supportive of the rest of the staff's recommendation as well, but just would encourage us as a community to try to collaborate with all members of the community where possible. And I don't think it'll take that much more time. It won't add to much significant delay either. It's just a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nye. Councillor Smith.
Mr Mayor, just if I may ask a question through you to Director Banasif. I just would like to confirm that it is a set of traffic lights. Does Ku-ring-gai Council have any weight in this with making a decision for the church whether or not they can enter in this intersection when we've got a set of traffic lights?
Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, ultimately the decision will be Transport for New South Wales.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. So it's not that I'm not against what has been put forward, but the main thing, what I want to do, is there any benefit in what has been proposed here this evening that is going to add any further weight or make the Transport think further about it?
Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I can't speak on behalf of Transport for New South Wales, but at the last traffic committee they were consulted regarding the driveway, and at that traffic committee in the general business they did not support the idea of having the driveway at that location.
Thank you, Director. I might just jump in
leave
here.
it at
You've got
that
one more
at the
question?
moment, thank you.
I might jump in here and I'll move an amendment that we move the officer's recommendation. And I seek a seconder. Seconded Councillor Spencer. So the amendment is the officer's recommendation. And as mover of that amendment, none of us are traffic experts. While I can appreciate where the church is coming from, it is not a logical place to have a driveway. If it was a new development there, you would not approve a driveway so close to a set of traffic lights. It would be irresponsible. And I know this from my own perspective. I have a large childcare centre being built next to me, which comprises 3 properties. They have moved their driveway from the corner of Fox Valley Road and the Commonara Parkway to a more sensible, safe location. They had existing driveways very close to the traffic lights, which had been there for many decades. So, whilst we're trying to appease the church with their limited use of this old driveway, I cannot support anything that would jeopardise the safety of people at that location by permitting the driveway to be used. Therefore, that is why I have put the officer's recommendation. I don't want to be responsible for a death at that driveway or the possibility of a death at that driveway once those lights are in place. As seconder, Councillor Spencer.
No, I just reserve my rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Speakers, Councillor Nye, you looking to have another chat?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Just 2 questions. At the most recent traffic committee where this was discussed, was this raised as an agenda item, or was this raised at the end as other business without as much notice?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it was raised in general business.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And my last question is, at this meeting of the traffic committee, was the possibility of front in at the intersection and front out at Tryon Road discussed? Because from my perspective, such a combination would not result in pedestrian deaths.
Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are a number of entries that were discussed at that corner. The Transport for New South Wales did not support the driveway in its location.
Thank you, Director. Director Watson, you have commentary?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's worth noting that the driveway is not physically capable of being used by a hearse. The internal dimensions of the driveway do not physically allow a large vehicle, a hearse, a stretch limo, for example, to physically use the driveway at all. So what we've done in the public domain plan is simply accommodate a public domain design that reflects the effective refusal of Transport to approve the configuration of lights at the location. What we did do is we've allowed a dedicated standing bay on Tryon Road, and smaller vehicles can still enter, do a reverse turn in a turning hammerhead and leave through the Tryon Road entry point in a forward, enter and leave in a forward direction.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Alec Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to speak against this motion, simply because...
Amendment. You're speaking against the amendment.
Amendment, I beg your
That's
pardon.
quite all right. You'll get there.
So just a couple of things. The church has been advised by Transport for New South Wales that they would consider a solution as advised by the council. So although they are actually the body that would make the decision, they would consider a solution that was proposed by us. So we do have the ability to affect the potential solution. On the matter of hearses, there are two types of hearses, very long ones and not so long ones, and the not so long ones are able to go in. And of course, it's not just about hearses, it's about all sorts of other vehicles, and in particular, vehicles for disabled people. And also, as Councillor Nye alluded, the church feels like this was kind of rushed through at the end and they weren't given the opportunity to properly engage. It is my job to represent the community, to engage and help them facilitate engagement with the council. They don't feel like they had the opportunity to do that properly. That's all I'm asking for.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. There being no further speakers, I can sum up if I so desire. I don't need to at this particular point in time. We'll put the amendment, which is the officer's recommendation. All those in favour? That is Councillor Spencer, Councillor Kay, Councillor Wheatley, Councillor Smith, Councillor Pettit. Those against? Councillor Alec Taylor, Councillor Greg Taylor, Councillor Ward, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Nye. That being 5-5. I use my casting vote in favour of the amendment, and the amendment is carried. Which becomes the motion. We now vote on the motion. All those in favour of the motion? Those in favour? The motion is the officer's recommendation. All right? So all those in favour of the motion, which is the officer's recommendation, which is Councillor Spencer, Councillor Kay, Councillor Alec Taylor, Councillor Wheatley, Councillor Ward, Councillor Smith, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Nye, Councillor Pettit. Those against? Councillor Greg Taylor. That motion is carried. That's about it. We now move to GB 23. And Councillor Smith, you withdrew that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move a motion. The staff have got that. If I could request that that be brought up onto the screen for everybody to read. So on GB 23, basically this is, okay, sorry, I'll read out what it is first. The first paragraph remains unchanged. I'll read it out. That Council adopt the draft asset management strategy with potential changes for NM2, footpaths in Ku-ring-gai, and draft workforce management strategy and endorse the long-term financial plan with potential changes from NM2, footpaths in Ku-ring-gai for public exhibition.
Get council staff to put that up on the board. No, it's just that's up, not the full.
Sorry, can I... Sorry, point of order, if I may.
You can do a point of order, yes.
NM2 has not been passed or debated. NM2 has not been passed or debated. So we can't speculate. We can't make a decision here before NM2.
And that, yeah, and I think that's what Councillor Smith's
I think
trying
we
to
used
say.
to call that, what, the cart before the horse or horse before the cart?
Yeah, there's two ways you could do it. You could either suspend standing orders so that you deal with Councillor Smith's notice of motion first, so you have clarity in relation to footpaths, or what Councillor Smith's trying to do here, I suspect, is adopt these planning documents, but noting that whatever changes are subsequently made in the notice of motion, we incorporate into these documents before they're exhibited. So either way it works. It's up to council whether you want to suspend and deal with the notice of motion first and then come back to this, or deal with it this way. Either way works.
So in theory with that general manager, so if NM2 nothing happens, then nothing gets put in to GB 23.
Correct.
The problem is there may be amendments or foreshadow and so on. We don't know what NM2 may be.
This is true.
Well, the only amendments that we'd make to GB 23 and GB 24 is what's actually resolved in the notice of motion, regardless of amendments foreshadowed. It's just what is ultimately carried by the council.
So does that make sense, Councillor Spencer?
I understand that. So we would accept whatever comes from NM2.
Would be
Not knowing
potentially,
what it
yes.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry, but that's probably not best practice to approve something before we know what it is.
And I think the way this is intended is that you're assuming that whatever happens with NM2, whatever shape or form, or nothing.
Could we stand
can
GB 23 on the list until after NM2?
Yeah, need to be a procedural motion to suspend standing orders to deal with NM2 prior to dealing with GB 23 and GB 24.
Yes.
So that's what you're moving, a procedure motion that
Yes, thank you, and I need a second.
NM2 is moved. Seconded Councillor Kay. All those in favour of suspending standing orders, and we deal with NM2 first. That is Councillor Spencer, Councillor Kay, Councillor Alec Taylor, Councillor Wheatley, Councillor Greg Taylor, Councillor Ward, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Nye. Those against, Councillor Smith and Councillor Pettit. That is carried. Councillors, we move to NM2.
And I thought I had a bit more time to prepare. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I would like to move NM2 as printed in the business papers.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, and I seek a seconder for NM2. Seconded Councillor Ward. Councillor Smith, you have the call to speak to your notice of motion.
Yes, I would like to speak to this notice of motion. I've just got a few points and facts. So I think as councillors, we're all sitting here tonight, and I think each and every one of us are constantly contacted by people that are frustrated in the time that it has taken to put footpaths in place in Ku-ring-gai. There's many challenges in putting this together, but I think basically with the notice of motion that I've put forward, I think that it takes care of the issue that we're trying to deal with, but at the same time keep in mind of council's budget that we're responsible for as councillors. There is a total of 398 kilometres of footpaths in Ku-ring-gai. Sadly, St Ives only retains 54 kilometres. That's 1/8 of the footpaths that are in Ku-ring-gai. As we're all presented in the workshop, we require an additional 268 kilometres of footpath just to get one footpath in each street. Council has allocated a budget of $5.2 million, which includes both renewal and for new footpaths. Unfortunately, there's only 537,000 that is for new footpaths. With that 537,000 that has been allocated for new footpaths, that is really going to give us 6 streets would be completed with footpaths, which is just not moving at the speed that our residents expect. We need to substantially allocate and find more money, but at the same time keeping in mind what the budget is and what the other restraints are in our budget, and we can't, unfortunately, haven't got a pool of money there just to spend. So what we've come up with here is just purely working within the existing budget, but spending more money on the renewal, which is what is really required with this. I've been working on this for the last 3 years with Director of Corporate and Director of Operations, and really believe what I've got here tonight will not only speed up the footpaths that are being delivered, and at the same time being fiscally responsible by not affecting other budgets and other things that we need to do in Ku-ring-gai. I think it's a perfect mix of what is needed. I would like to assure everybody here tonight that I've worked very closely with the 2 departments that are the most heavily impacted with this type of notice of motion, and we've actually found that we're basically spending too much on constant repairs and maintenance on footpaths, where we can comfortably allocate the additional spend on this. So I believe that it's in the interest of Ku-ring-gai, and I really do hope to get everybody's support here tonight. It's a balanced, fair decision for both the council and the ratepayers of Ku-ring-gai. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. The seconder, Councillor Ward.
Mr Mayor, I reserve my right.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Nye.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a question to Director Bonassif. My understanding of the motion at the moment is that we will increase the spending on footpaths new footpaths from 500-something thousand a year to 1.25 million a year, and to fund the extra $700,000 or so per year, we will decrease the budget for the maintenance of footpaths by that amount on a year-on-year basis. Is that correct?
Director.
The $5.2 million for the 23 budget consists of $537,000 for new footpaths, $2.69 million for renewal, and $1.9 million for upgrade. So I believe, from my understanding of the notice of motion, is to reduce the renewal amount.
Okay, and then second question, if we do reduce the renewal amount by the roughly 700,000 or so per annum, I suspect in the first year and the second year there won't be much noticeable difference, but will there be any impacts to the quality of our footpaths in the long term? And is this something similar to roads where it's much cheaper to repair a road when there's a pothole as opposed to just redoing it once it's in a bad condition? Like, are you comfortable with reducing the repairs budget by that much in the medium and long term?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm relatively comfortable that that the gap can be funded through the renewal. What it looks like a few years down the track, it's a matter of what requests have come through from the community regarding any maintenance, ongoing maintenance. But based on our asset management plans and strategies, I'm relatively comfortable with this strategy moving forward.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Nye?
Okay, and just one final question to Councillor Kay. Are you comfortable with where we're at now? Because I originally had an alternate motion, but I don't plan to move it unless you want to move it.
Councillor Kay?
That's okay. In what I do have is a question. So if I'm next on the list.
You are
can I
next on the list.
proceed?
Fire away with your question.
Okay, so this question is through you, Mr. Mayor, to Director Marshall. Director Marshall, if I could make, and this is of relevance, if I could refer to GB 24, which is the draft delivery program and the section that states new footpaths. And I want to clarify my interpretation. So I think it's page
Yes, quote the page, that way councillors can...
215 of GB 24, so GB 24, 215.
We'll just let councillors flick to that page before asking a question.
Okay, so I'll just read the paragraph that is relevant. And I believe this was compiled from Director Marshall. An option to provide some additional funding towards new footpaths would be by decreasing planned expenditure on asset renewal. However, this would be detrimental to the renewal of existing infrastructure assets. Further additional assets increase the future maintenance and renewal burden. Council could consider a special rates variation in the future for the construction of new footpaths. Can you clarify and expand on that, Director Marshall?
Director Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it is the case that at the moment for footpaths, we currently spend more on renewing the existing footpaths than they depreciate in a year. So over time, those footpaths should improve in their condition. So on that level, there is probably some capacity if we do as is proposed. I think the amount we spend on renewal will probably drop down to about the level of depreciation or thereabouts. So footpaths as a whole should not get worse, they should just hold their own. But I think when we're talking about assets, we need to look at the bigger picture of assets. And also in the report, on the previous page, 213, we deal very briefly, to keep it at a simple high level, with the other assets. So based on what we're spending on renewal across all assets, roads will improve, footpaths will improve, but not if we do this, they'll stay about the same. Curb and gutter, car parks, roads and structures and bridges will deteriorate over the next 10 years. Buildings will deteriorate, with many not meeting current building codes or community expectations. Recreation and park assets will deteriorate and may lead to defective facilities and equipment. Stormwater drains will deteriorate and may lead to blocked pipes, flooding and sinkholes. Recent visual inspection indicated that condition of drains may require more remediation than previously assessed. So the comment in the report about moving renewal funding out of renewal into building new things, no matter what it is meant in the context of the bigger picture. So moving any money from any asset out of renewal to new assets is detrimental to renewal. And the further comment was that building more footpaths actually does increase the ongoing maintenance and renewal burden. Having said that, it's obviously up to councillors to balance up the desire for new footpaths in the context of existing footpaths. So I'm of the view that if the decision is made to increase the new budget on balance, then where it is proposed to come from is probably as good as any in the short term. But in the longer term, we clearly have issues to resolve about funding for all of our infrastructure assets and how we have adequate funding and whether we've got the balance right with assets versus the services we provide, etc. But that's not something that we can solve immediately. So the short term, I think that if council is on balance of a mind to spend more on building new footpaths, then this proposal is sound. But in the medium to longer term, we need to look at all of our assets and try to be sustainable. Do it sustainably.
So is it better to put a time frame on this annual footpath renewal budget, say for the next 2 or 3 years, rather than having it ongoing? Because I feel like I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul at the end of the day, and sadly there's no guarantee that this will come to St Ives ward, for example, and it won't be absorbed all by one ward, i.e. Roseville.
Was there a question in there, Councillor Kay? Or was that more commentary? I'm not quite sure where you were heading with that.
Are we robbing Peter to pay Paul?
Yes, robbing from
Or
other
we're
wards.
robbing from Roseville
And-
to...
No.
I'm quite sure
it
where that
was
was.
in relation to the budget date. So is this something that we could look at and putting a time frame on it? Because it sort of doesn't, it just says annual footpath renewal budget. It doesn't put a limit on it.
Okay.
I mean, is this something that we're looking at for the next 10 or 20 years, you know? And by what you've just enlightened me with, it wouldn't make sense to do so.
Councillor Kay, we do review our budgets yearly. We can look at a time frame. Having said that, with footpaths, they don't tend to deteriorate too dramatically. So you might wish to ask a question on the life expectancy of a new footpath.
When we talk about the notice of motion here, we're talking about decreasing the number of years. So it wouldn't be, you know, something we're looking for 1 year. We're looking as this is a continuous cycle. So to say, yes, we review the budgets each year is correct, but not in the context of what the notice of motion, the path it's trying to go down.
That's
If
quite...
you understand.
I do see where you're coming from, but again, it's up to councillors and future councils to decide how they wish to allocate their resources. The next council term, they may wish to reduce it dramatically or increase it dramatically. We can't necessarily speculate on what the future might be and what the future expenditure on whether it be new or renewals are. So I can see where you're coming from.
Thank you, that's it.
That's all right. Councillor Spencer.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, Mr. Mayor, sorry.
It's okay, you can pick whichever one you wish, Councillor Spencer, it's okay.
Perhaps this question is to Director Marshall or whoever. Could the Director tell us the difference between the renewed footpath and new footpath in terms of book value and depreciation?
Director Marshall.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, they depreciate at the same rate. I'm not sure what the book value of our existing footpaths are. Perhaps the Manager of Finance might be able to look it up.
I
and let us
believe that
know.
would be a good way of going there, that to get those numbers, if you so desire.
I mean, yeah, so I think the Manager of Finance might be able to assist. Is that existing footpaths? Perhaps if you'd give us a few moments, we could find that figure out for you.
Could you send it through via email?
Yes, we can.
It's not
Councillor.
essential that we have it here, but it's good to know. See, there's a distinction between a new asset and a renewed asset.
You might wish to take that on notice, Director?
Happy to do that, Mr Mayor.
Excellent.
Especially for book value and, of course, depreciation as well. I understand the rate of depreciation is the same, but the quantum is different. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Nye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask two questions, and I would like to speak in support of the motion. But first, the two questions. The first question is, on page 216, it says, Council could consider a special rates variation in the future for the construction of new footpaths. So my question is, if we wanted to go down that path to, instead of rob Peter and Paul and give the other one, instead of doing that, we increase our rates. What is the process for that? What's the timing? What's the time frame? And does it need to be initiated by councillors first, or does it need to be initiated by council staff?
Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ultimately, it needs a council resolution to go down that path, whether it's initiated via staff putting up a report or councillors moving something is neither here nor there. The time frame, it really takes a couple of years. So if council wanted to apply for a special rates increase to take effect from the start of 23-24, it would need to apply to IPART at the end of this calendar year to do so, and then IPART let us know early next year. If we were to go down that path, though, we would really need to look at all of our assets, because IPART would say, have you looked holistically at all of your assets? And based on the information I provided before, they'd probably say, should you be building new footpaths when your existing assets have problems? So we would need to get over that hurdle if we were to go down a special rates increase. And regardless of IPART, as I think we've talked about before, we do need to look at the bigger picture of assets as well, regardless of IPART or anyone else. And in it, to look in the longer term, how we're going to sustainably manage them when we've got the problems that we're already aware of.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. And my second question is, my understanding from budgets is that the council staff, council officers propose a budget to the councillors, and then the councillors usually amend it if they want to, or accept it after going through public exhibition, etc. But also my understanding is that it seems that we are comfortable, at least in the short term, to increase spending on new footpaths whilst decreasing spend on footpath maintenance. So if that is so attractive, why was it not originally proposed to us in the budget that the budget should be 1.25 million on footpaths and less on footpath maintenance? Why do we have the sort of original or default position of 500-something thousand plus 2-point-something million? Is it just a rollover?
Director Marshall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. From a financial sustainability perspective, we should not be spending more money on new footpaths. And I think I've made that clear in the report. It's not really sensible financially to do this. However, as I mentioned before, councillors have to balance up a whole lot of things other than purely financial sustainability, and I know that there's a lot of demand out there for new footpaths in the community. So that's a matter for you to balance up. And so the reason we didn't recommend that in the first place is purely because we don't believe that we should be building new things while our existing assets we can't afford to maintain properly.
Okay, thank you. And now I'd like to speak in support of Councillor Smith's motion. Footpaths has been an issue that has plagued us for years. It's always been a talking point. I commend Councillor Smith for raising this motion. It seems like we do have the capacity to build new footpaths. There is some question about the financial sustainability of it long term, but as noted in one of our discussions tonight, we always have an option in the future to amend the budget again to prioritise repairs and maintenance and new footpaths. I think it's important that we act on delivering these footpaths now. And my only additional comment is that what I find strange about the delivery of footpaths is that sometimes I have residents complaining about the lack of footpaths in the area, whether it be Bradfield Road or Churchill Road outside Killara High School, or about, you know, a few other places around all parts of Ku-ring-gai. And those are complaints or concerns that are raised and nothing's done about it. And then we have other footpaths, such as some in West Linfield that were delivered recently, where from my point of view, no one actually asked for it. It only happened to fall upon a certain matrix that we have to say this is up next. So I am supportive of a matrix and a way of prioritising how we spend our footpath money, but I do think that the matrix itself needs to be reviewed in the upcoming months. I do believe that in addition to increasing footpath spend, we also need to think about, does it make sense for us as councillors to spend footpath money on certain parts of Ku-ring-gai where there hasn't been as much demand for new footpaths, whereas there are other parts of Ku-ring-gai where the demand is much stronger and the demand is not met for a number of years. That is a long-term issue, but in the short term, yes, let's increase our new footpath budget. We'll talk about the matrix at another point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. Councillor Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions, please.
Indeed.
Following on the question to Director Marshall, could you also include in the answers the life cycle as well between renewed footpaths and new footpaths?
Director.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we can.
Thank you. This is a question perhaps for Director Bonasev, through you. Which ward has the most footpaths?
Director, and I think we all know this answer, but anyway, far away.
Oh, refresh my memory,
No,
please. Thank you.
Councillor Spencer, it's a good idea to refresh one's memory. Director Bonasev.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Roseville.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
See, when Councillor Kay was talking about robbing from Peter to pay Paul or something like that. Now, the last thing we want to see is, you know, Roseville robbing from the other wards to put even more footpaths in their ward. There are wards, for instance, I know, if I could recall, Kumanara has the least footpaths.
Indeed we do.
That's right.
Without
And
being
second to that
ward-centric.
is Warunga. That's right. So if, you know, I would support Councillor Nai's suggestion that the order in which the footpaths are to be built would be as per required. So we're not going to tear up, you know, footpaths in Roseville to put a brand new one, for instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Lennon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Operations Director Bernasef, can you just confirm to us, following Councillor Nai's comments, the process by which we choose which particular streets have footpaths, in particular the issue of community consultation? The residents of some streets don't want footpaths, residents of other streets do. Can you just confirm that the motion tonight will not override the wishes of residents in particular streets as to whether they want a footpath or not?
Director Bonasev.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think there's two parts to that question. One is how they're prioritised and how the streets are nominated. So they're based around the priority score matrix, which Councillor Nye mentioned earlier. And that's takes the criteria for the priority score matrix includes business districts, also includes hospitals, proximity to hospitals and nursing homes, proximity to playgrounds and retirement facilities, proximity to schools, train stations and bus routes. At the beginning of the financial year, councillors, a notification is sent to residents in the street. As part of that notification, it gives them an option to advise us whether they're for or against the construction of the footpath, and if we receive enough notification where an overwhelming majority are against the footpath within that street, and then funds are withdrawn from that street and allocated to the next street on the priority list.
Thank you, Director. Just following on from that, we did that recently in Ku-ring-gai ward, where there was quite a substantial objection to a footpath being built. We chose not to proceed with that. We then redirected the funds to an alternate location. So even though we do have this matrix which does prioritise it, it is not set in stone. It can be varied, and that can be varied across all wards and particular streets. Obviously, we don't want to adversely affect certain locations, but if they so desire not to have a footpath, not a problem to accommodate that. I'm sure we can reallocate that to another street, and those residents will be happy. Councillors, it certainly is one of those election issues that comes up every time. We want a footpath. When are we going to get it? Oh, maybe 30 years' time. It is not really, good, is it? Well, I've been quoting 30 to various locations, so it can be up to 80. And people will move to the area and die in the area without getting a footpath. And really, we need to address that. And this is the first step in that process. Hopefully, future councils will be able to get more funding in this particular area. It is certainly a way for us to be seen to being proactive. One of the questions was, why did we have so many dollars spent in renewal as opposed to building new ones? Fit for the future. Remember that little beastie? We had to fix our asset renewal backlog. So therefore it was not advisable to build a lot of new footpaths. We needed to renew things. So that's probably one of the reasons why it can be seen as a little bit out of kilter. So I hope that helps address that situation for councillors. Again, we need to be seen and actually do something to get more footpaths in. How many emails do we receive on a regular basis across all wards? I want my footpath. Why aren't you building it? I've referred one or two on into the St Ives ward councillors. The particular resident was most objectionable. He hated it, didn't want to see it. He was one voice amongst many. And the majority of residents in that location wanted the footpath. So that's the reason why we have a matrix. Because we don't want our allocation to be based on the noisiest and loudest. We want it to be allocated fairly and impartially. And I'll leave it at that. And I'm supporting Councillor Smith's motion. Councillor Smith, do you have the call?
Mr Mayor, sorry, I probably jumped ahead of this. I was just going to sum up.
Unless you have further questions, you can sum up.
I'm happy to sum up. Thank you.
And indeed, sum up.
So I think this evening here, I feel that we've got a perfect balance that we can put back to Ku-ring-gai. With the renewal, we've gone from 700K, and we're proposing for it to go to 1.25 million, which I'll be certainly a lot more comfortable telling my residents in Ku-ring-gai. I listened to what Director Marshall has suggested, well not suggested, but said given an option of rates increases, I believe that is a basic requirement for people that live in Ku-ring-gai without a rate increase to expect a footpath. So I really feel that with delivering footpaths, we should be doing it within the budgets that we've got. I believe that this will achieve that. Our residents have been asking, as the Mayor was just saying, at sometimes just on the phone to me saying, what is it that we need to do to speed this up? This tonight gives us the opportunity not to deliver all the footpaths that need to be delivered, but it gives us the opportunity to say that we're listening and we're actually moving forward with something to help deliver these footpaths where required, where needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I'll now put Councillor Smith's motion. All those in favour? And that is Councillor Spencer, Councillor Alec Taylor, Councillor Wheatley, Councillor Greg Taylor, Councillor Ward, Councillor Smith, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Knight, Councillor Pettit. Those against? Councillor Kay. That motion is carried. And we roll back to GB 23, which was withdrawn by Councillor Smith. So let's go there again.
Okay. GB 23, I'd like to move a motion. Moving this motion, if I could please ask the council staff to bring that up.
We're actually going to incorporate everything in that, so you probably don't need to.
Yeah, we can
You don't need
incorporate 23, 24. Do we need to?
Because we've done the notice of motion first, as Councillor Spencer alluded to before, and now goes without saying that that change would be reflected
So we can just move it.
in these documents. Yep, so you just move the officers.
As
move
per
the
the
officers.
officer's recommendation.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
I know, actually, Director Marshall wants to tweak it a bit.
We'll just hang fire on that for the moment.
Just that'll do. Okay. That's crystal clear.
Councillor Smith, we're just getting that clarified, but I think incorporating what you had previously does make it very crystal clear. And I seek a seconder for that. Everybody's flicking through their business papers. Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillor Smith, you have the call to speak to your motion.
I think I've spoken enough this evening.
There's no debate, probably. It's just the officer's recommendation now.
It's as per the officer's recommendation. If there's no debate, I'm quite happy to put that.
Happy
All
to
those in
support
favour? That is unanimous. GB 24.
Exactly the same again. Same wording.
So it'll
that.
be
I'd like to
exactly
move
the same wording
Officers, yep, recommendation.
with that
with
that little bit
with
extra
changes.
wording, that's
Yes,
fine.
for GB 24.
And a seconder for that. Councillor Wheatley. Councillor Wheatley was a little bit quicker on the mark. That's quite. It always helps to use the light. Okay, just a handy hint for the home user. All right. There being no debate on this matter, I'll just put the Councillor Smith's motion. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
So, Mr Mayor, we now go back to the first book. Just quickly before NM1, there are no extra reports circulated to the meeting.
Thank you, General Manager. We now go to NM1, which was the motion, notice of motion by Councillors Lennon and Taylor, and I seek a motion. Councillor Lennon,
Yes, I'll move that motion.
so you're moving the motion as printed to be adopted. Seconded, Councillor Alec Taylor. Councillors, anybody wish to speak to this, or have they all? Councillor Lennon,
I should speak to
think indeed you should.
You're very kind, Mr.
Fire away.
A couple of months ago, Councillor Ward and I stood with the operations director and one of our council staffers in a house in Kalara. In that house with us, there were 25 local residents. There was another at least 25 who would have liked to have been there that weekday afternoon who couldn't join us. And what brought us there together that afternoon was the loss of 5 trees dead, another one dying. Those residents were very angry, they were very upset. One particular elderly lady I recall spoke about her life she'd spent following the tree preservation orders and wondering why she bothered if people were not. Now, around the walls of that particular lounge room where we stood, there were pictures of what used to be. of these glorious, beautiful, lush, tall trees. They were no longer there. But out the back window, through the glass doors, in the property next door, was what is probably best described as a post-apocalyptic scene of what is there now. That day, Councillor Ward and I and our council staff said to those residents there and those who hadn't joined us that we as council was doing everything we could to prevent illegal tree removal. That means prosecuting those who commit it wherever the evidence allows, and it means processes of education. Now, doing everything we can is not simply acting on our knowledge. It's developing our knowledge, learning what we can, being at the leading edge of knowing what other people are doing and applying our imagination. I spoke to an arborist about what was happening to get my increased knowledge of just what is going on out there in terms of illegal tree removal. At the same time, Councillor Alec Taylor was also speaking to an arborist. Councillor Alec Taylor had the data. He had the statistics of what was happening at a high level. We came together one afternoon in the council rooms behind us, councillors, the mayor, council staff, and both of those arborists. And we tossed around some ideas. We also drew upon the knowledge that people had. Every person in that room had ideas, had knowledge of what was happening, and we drew upon that to maximise the efforts that this council can take to prevent illegal tree removal, to prosecute those who do it. This motion today is building on that workshop. This is not a one-off process. This is not something that will end when the report comes back to us if the motion is passed today. We see this as being an indefinite process, year on, year out, by which we draw upon our imagination, by which staff draws upon their imagination and the knowledge they have. And I know Councillor Ward and I and Councillor Alec Taylor, and I'm sure other councillors stand by ready to assist however staff wants, just to put Ku-ring-gai at the leading edge of making sure people know that in this municipality, you follow the law. You do not remove trees illegally, A, because you know the consequences if you do, and also because people are well informed. So we're trying to create a process by which year in, year out, this motion is just one moment in it. This council is applying imagination and drawing upon knowledge to enforce the law around tree removal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lennon. Councillor Taylor, I'm sure you need to speak to this.
I don't actually, so I do also think that I have probably spoken enough tonight and would like to reserve my right to speak to this.
That's quite all right. If you will let me indulge myself, councillors. Congratulations to Councillor Lennon and Councillor Taylor. We did a lot of work. You had to put up with my devil's advocate, and you'll hear that a lot over the next few years, and I hope you appreciate I always try and get the best outcomes when we work on motions. So we spent a number of weeks and a large amount of effort behind the scene, councillors, to get to where we are with this. As Councillor Lennon said, it's one step in the process. We are looking to improve our education with our new residents. There'll be various options. We've done that in the past, but obviously there's more that we can do, and there will be more avenues that will come to the fore with their investigation. So you both well done. Keep up the good work. And hopefully we have unanimous support for this one. Councillor Kay, do you have a question or do you have commentary?
I can have both if you
Oh,
like.
well,
Is there anything against that?
No, you might be all questioned out.
Well, it's probably a question that can come back with commentary from the relevant director. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the relevant director, Director Manasseh. You had forwarded this to me earlier about some tree breach statistics. I'm hoping you do have that in front of you. I was just wondering if you could maybe highlight these categories, and this is for the financial year of 2020 to 21, because there's things like caution issued for poisoning, things like that. Can you expand a little bit on these categories so I just have an understanding of what really is happening here in Ku-ring-gai with tree poisoning? So could you go through the categories?
Director, if that's straightforward for you.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Mayor, the total reports, the total alleged breaches reported to council or investigated in the financial year 20 to 21 were 442. 69% of the reports were determined not a breach, which means we've investigated and there's no issues with what's actually occurred. There were 1%, which was 6 penalty notices for tree poisoning, because the trees were poisoned. Removal penalty, there were 9% of the 442, which equates to 41 penalties, were issued for illegal removal of the tree. That's where the property owner has removed the tree without a council permit. Caution issued for poisoning, there were 7, and that was determined as not an intent poisoning of the tree. Very difficult in these situations to prove that it was intent, considering it is a criminal offence. So 7 were defined as, were cautioned. There were 36 cases, or 8%, caution of pruning or removal. And in that case, that's removal of a smaller tree without a permit. When we're talking about a smaller tree, it's non-significant tree, and undertaking pruning works without a permit. So total penalties issued for the financial year were 47 of the 442, at 11%, and total breaches were 90, or 20% of the 442 alleged cases.
Thank you, Director.
Can I
That's okay.
just, so these reports that were not a breach, can you expand a little bit on what they actually are? You know, is this just people saying, oh, okay, I think someone's removed a tree and that is incorrect? Can you just expand a little bit in the description of what would be considered not a breach and what people are obviously thinking is a breach enough to report it?
Yeah.
Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it could be as simple as they had a permit and we investigated and it wasn't a breach. And the neighbouring resident had no idea that the resident who removed the tree already had a permit in place.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Spencer?
Thank you. I would like to speak for this motion. Now, I've come across continuous complaints about trees being removed without permits. And I believe we have discussed this on numerous occasions with between myself and staff and so on. So I'm really supportive of this motion. I would like to add that I'm not amending anything. This motion is pretty open, that staff would explore ideas, additional measures and so on to reduce illegal tree removal. Now that should include legal budgets. To my understanding, we are limited by legislation to fine up to $3,000. Now, we could fine them up to $100,000, but then we have to take them to court. And many times, we don't have the budget to do that. And therefore, the people know. I wouldn't say all of them are developers. They would know that we are constricted by this budget, and they would challenge us, and they would chop down 18 trees, for instance, and pay 18 times 3, because they know we don't have that budget to take them to court, spending at least $100,000 on an occasion. Now, if I'm not mistaken, through you, Mr. Mayor, if Director Bonasev could reconfirm that we had this discussion before. Thank you. And they would explore that avenue as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we have had a discussion in the past regarding council taking residents or taking property owners to court, unfavourable to council, and we will take on notice Councillor Spencer's request and look into it holistically with our investigations into this motion.
So I'll just finish off.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
So essentially, the issue that council is facing, staff is facing, is this. So we can fine them up to $100,000, but then we have to spend $100,000 to get that $100,000. You know, so it doesn't make sense, and we may not get it. So we might as well just issue a $3,000 fine. So this is a kind of a catch-22 situation.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Smith?
Mr Mayor, I'll be speaking in support of this notice of motion. It is a fantastic notice of motion. Congratulations, Councillor Lennon, and congratulations, Councillor Taylor. I think it is something that the community expects from us in Ku-ring-gai. People have moved to Ku-ring-gai to live with the trees and to live in this environment, and I think that this is a very good start and will, from the sounds of things and from what the two councillors are suggesting, that it grows in order to protect this environment that people have chosen to live in. So for the following reasons, I'm in a great deal of support. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Nye?
Thank you. I've got a question to the relevant director. If a resident chops down 18 trees and it's found that all 18 trees were not appropriately chopped or given consent or whatever, is the fine 18 by 3,000 or is the fine just $3,000?
Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it's $3,000.
Okay, so now I would like to speak in support of the motion. So as we just said, look, you chop down one tree, if it was not authorised, $3,000. You chop down 2 trees, $3,000. Chop down 18 trees, you get fined $3,000. So there's not much disincentive for people to go, well, why stop at one? Just clear them all. And that's what we do see happening in various parts of Ku-ring-gai. I do commend the motion. I do believe it's a good start. I do believe also that education plays a very important role in all of this, because I have faced with situations where residents have said, you know, if I had known that if I'd planted this tree in this location, that the implications would be X, Y, and Z, I would not have planted the tree here in the first place. I would have planted it 5 metres that way, that sort of thing. Or I would have planted a different type of tree. So I do believe that part of our role as a council is to help educate residents the value of trees, how it has, you know, certain climate benefits as well, but also what type of trees should we be planting and where should we be planting it? Because it's just not that fun when, you know, 5 or 10 years later, after a tree has been planted, it's having a detrimental impact on the resident or a neighbouring resident, and when, you know, good education could have solved that to begin with. It's quite a complex task. I look forward to working with all the councillors and all the council staff to sort of solve this problem in the coming years. But just going back to the original point, chopping down 18 trees and being only fined $3,000, it's basically a fine, not a fine, it's a fee. It's a fee to chop down 18 trees. It's not acceptable. And so I would commend this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. And I'll probably just finish off with one question which the Director may well take on notice, and we can look at exploring this at a further stage. But in regards, we're obviously in furious agreement with this notice of motion. However, looking at reporting back to Council on how the numbers have changed over time historically in the various categories and also going forward, whether we report that on a 6-monthly basis or annual basis back to councillors, just so we can measure to see what success that we have had through the various changes and education processes, whether that's possible. Director?
Mr Mayor, it is possible. And we'll take it on notice and report back.
Thank you, Director. There being no further discussion on this particular motion, all those in favour? That is unanimous. Business without notice, subject to clause 9.3 of the Code of Meeting Practice. There is none. Questions with notice. There is one question with notice.
Which the Director of Strategy and Environment will answer now, Mr Mayor.
Through you, Mr Mayor, this question relates to the cost of delaying or deferring work on the Marion Street Theatre. That decision to recommence was only made in late March. We haven't yet reached the end of a full billing cycle, so we haven't actually been invoiced for any additional costs. So I'm not in a position to report anything at all on that matter.
Thank you, Director. We have a site inspection, setting of time, date and rendezvous.
I have to take that on notice, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. That's it. Councillors, that concludes the council meeting at 9:33. Thank you for your attendance, and to the gallery as well, too, and those online.